Hey everybody, this is Chris from Skeleton Labs. This video is part of an ongoing series where we cover updates and progress towards Skeleton V3, our next major iteration of Skeleton. If you haven't already, definitely come check out our Skeleton repository here on GitHub. And we have a discussion section that links to the proposal, RFC, and also each of the prior updates covering everything from templates to themes to that kind of thing. So lots and lots and lots of things you've covered in the past. Definitely go check that out. The focus of today's video is going to be components. We have a few things to showcase as far as first few components added to Skeleton V3. So without further ado, I want to dive in straight into a little bit of the architecture. So the architecture specifically is what we're kind of covering here. Is relevant to know just to kind of have a general frame of reference for some of the terminology and some of the things that I'm throwing out at you. So if I say package or module or something like that, this is the kind of stuff I'm talking about. So in V2, we kind of have this structure where we had two different NPM packages. We had one for Skeleton and one called TW plugin, which stands for Tailwind plugin. So the plugin, obviously covers everything from our theme system, some utility classes, element styles, stuff like that, buttons, things like that. The actual core library was the other way around. It handled the functional stuff. So components, Svelte actions, Svelte utilities, things like that. So we've changed this in V3 and it's just a little bit more modular. So the core package is now kind of being taken over by the Tailwind plugin, which again handles those things listed on the screen. And then anything functional is going to be kind of abstracted out to its own little standalone package. So we'll have Skeleton Svelte, which handles all of the Svelte, Svelte specific features, especially components. Svelte React, which handles React components for Skeleton and any other, hooks or utility features there. And then, kind of grow that list over time. There'll also be kind of the concept of some third-party or first-party packages or modules that you can add on for more dedicated features, pop-ups, code blocks, that kind of thing. So this is the structure of what makes up a V3 Skeleton V3 application. You've got your core, you've got your framework of choice, framework components, and then any kind of extra add-ons that you add yourself. Okay, so that's kind of where we are with that. If you're kind of curious what that looks like in the code side of things, so again, this is the Skeleton library. This is the code itself. So we have sites directory that houses our V2 documentation and our V3 documentation, and then we have, and this is again on the next branch here, we have the packages directory, which houses the core package, the Svelte package, and the React package. So if you're just kind of curious where those live, or if you just want to kind of come in and browse the code for any of those, I just wanted to kind of showcase where those exist. Okay, so let's jump over to the docs and let's take a look at what the new component stuff looks like. So this is running a local instance of the documentation site. If you're kind of curious to see or run this yourself, we have a link right here that you can run. That's next.skeleton.dev, and that will take you to the remote version that has a lot of these features that I'm about to showcase. I'm just running the local version so that I can modify some code and show you some quick examples of what that looks like. There's a couple of visual cosmetic changes over the last update that I put out. Things like we have these new kind of tabs for selecting between the different frameworks, so you can see the accordion feature for React or the accordion feature for Svelte and kind of quickly compare those. You can also see the code for each of those, so you can see here's the code that I used to scaffold and use the accordion, including how I import it, and then look at the React version, how do I import it, how do I put it into a Svelte specific file, right? The format that you're used to on the Svelte site. And then how do I implement and use the component itself? That's all kind of detailed right here. Okay, so that's the doc site. There are a couple kind of neat little details that I want to showcase here, which is are some things I want to kind of call out here, which is one, you may notice when I toggle in here, we're seeing this kind of weird jump in animation. When I come to the React component, you're going to see that it's not animating. Those are things that we're aware of. Those are things that we're still working on. All this is a work in progress. Just bear with us. But that aside, I do want to kind of showcase some really cool stuff that's going on with the components themselves. So we have the component preview shown here. We have the component, the code that's used to generate what you're seeing in that preview. And all of this is one-to-one. So you're not, unlike the V2 docs, you're not going to have some kind of weird discrepancy between what is rendered on the page and what the code snippet itself looks like, which is, a highly requested change. So very excited to have that in place. The other cool thing with the docs site, we now have these little buttons here at the top, which represent links to the source code for the React component. So you can tap that, come here and see all of the source code for the React component, the types file that's kind of lives alongside that. We can see the Svelte version of this, which has the parent and child item and types. And we can even look at how the documentation page itself is built. So if you're kind of curious about any of that, all of that is visible to you. Okay. We also link to the ARIA APG, which just talks about, what are the expected keyboard interactions and things for these components. And you can see those things are functionally working. I can tab through, I can hit enter, and it'll open that panel that I have selected. Okay. All right, so that's the documentation site. Now let's take a look at the components themselves, because this is really where it kind of gets interesting and you start to see some of the cool structural changes that we're making behind the scenes. And so for this example, I'm going to actually open the V2 version of the accordion. Let me see here. Yeah, there we go. So here's what the accordion looks like in the V2 version. You can kind of interact with it, see what it looks like. We can see a list of the props that are available, a list of the slots and events and things like that. All of the bits and pieces that you use to be able to interface and interact with the component, and when you're implementing it in your project itself, right? How you import it, how do you scaffold it, what are the slots available, on and on and on. All right, so that's the V2 version. We also look at the source code here and take a look at how the accordion component is constructed. And so this is, again, the wrapping version. This is the version that kind of surrounds all of the items, if you will. So it's the group of everything. And so this is the component that actually implements that. And so there's quite a lot of boilerplate in the V2 version. You can see we're doing things like bringing in the transitions for the dynamic transition system that Skeleton V2 supports. We've got a whole slew of properties that are being provided, including the property name, the default value, the type. We've got this kind of inline documentation that we're using to kind of generate the values that you see populated over here. So we're using JSDoc formats to kind of create all of that. And then you go a little further, we're using the context API to provide some values from the parent component down to the child item component, so the accordion item. And then we're doing the reactive property to kind of scaffold and put together a few of those class properties like the width, spacing, etc., and then drop those down into the template itself. And the template itself it's kind of funny, like 99% of this is not actually the template. It's just this. The template is just these three little lines here. This component, of course, is built using Svelte 4. So all of the syntax you're seeing here for how props are defined, how the slots defined, etc., those are using Svelte 4's convention. Now, if you're not familiar, Svelte is coming out with a new version here soon called Svelte 5. And they have a document site provided here that lets you see all the new features. So runes, snippets, how event handlers are changing, how reactivity is changing with the use of the runes, so on and so forth. Lots and lots of cool details in the doc site. I will link to this in the written version of this video guide, just in case you're curious, you want to go check out some of that. But let's go ahead and fast forward over to the new version, the V3 version of the accordion that you see rendered right here, the Svelte version. Okay, so if we come over here, I've got my VS Code open. I've got several projects open, or several packages. I've got the documentation site. I've got the Skeleton Svelte component package set up, right? And I also have the Skeleton React component package set up here. So if I want to, I can jump over to the Svelte version. I can browse down into the accordion location here, and then here's our component. Here's the actual code that powers the V3 version of the accordion. And so first thing you're going to take away is there's a much less boilerplate. We've ripped out a lot of the things that were present in the V2 version while still preserving or even increasing the amount of features provided by even just this one component. Some notable changes or things that have been removed. We do not have the transition stuff ported across. We're kind of on the fence if that'll carry forward or not. So, just note of like, hey, there's some things that are removed that may or may not make it into V3. We just don't feel like it's being used properly enough to really justify the amount of code and maintenance required to kind of keep that in place. But again, the result is much simpler code that's much easier for you as a user to come in here and understand what the component is doing, how it's operating, and much easier for us to build and maintain, which is really one of our end goals with this. A couple other notable changes: we're now using the Skeleton v5 format for importing props, which looks like this. We have a rune called props, a type definition on this object, this destructured object, which represents all of the kind of props that are provided and all of the default values for each prop. So the space Y prop has this as its default value. And if we look down here, we're using the context API to provide a few details from the accordion component to the accordion item child component. Just passes that state down for a few things like animation duration and so on and so forth. Just allows you to provide those, a single setting on the parent, and it provides it down to the child. The other thing we're doing is we've kind of ripped out and removed that idea of these like reactive properties to kind of scaffold and group all of the style props that are provided. And those are now just being provided verbatim straight into the template. Again, just eliminating some complexity, some boilerplate that was unnecessary, and just making this much simpler. The other thing is we have a Svelte 5 convention here for replacing what was previously the slot component. If we come down here and look, the slot component tag here, that has now been replaced with render, which handles snippets, and snippets being the kind of replacement for slots in Svelte 5. So if you haven't checked those out, definitely go look at them. Very cool. Very nice and clean syntax. It's pretty easy to understand what it's doing. Okay. A couple other things. We do have kind of the addition of the state utility class that's being provided. We're just doing this to kind of provide some reactivity to one of the context values that's provided in. We're still kind of working through the convention there. That's not set in stone. But if you're kind of curious what that is, that's all that's going on there. But again, the end result is much slimmer, much simpler, and much easier to look at and navigate. If we come and look at the React version, we can see we have the React components are a little different. So they're structured they're composed in with smaller pieces. So React doesn't have kind of an equivalent to slots or multiple named children like some other frameworks do. So what we do instead is we just build smaller components that you use to kind of compose and control the structure. Here's the control, and here's the panel, and then in the Svelte version, that would use a snippet. It would use the control, and it would use the panel for the snippet. Okay, so if you're kind of curious, like why is that different, just understand that. The end result is, of course, we have more components kind of defined here. We have the root component, we have the accordion component, the control, and of course the panel to kind of provide all four of those options. Those are just defined with your standard React syntax for components. If you come from React or you understand React, a lot of that should look very familiar. You've got your prop definition, you have your template, simple as that. All right. So just so you know, that's how that's structured. If we come and look very specifically at the root, you're going to see a lot of those same props here. You're going to see some state stuff here that we're doing to just be able to control the selected and multiple, and then providing those to a context provider for the context API equivalent for React. So again, if you're coming from the Svelte world, this is looking a little alien to you. I just wanted to provide some information with what you're seeing there. Okay. Again, most of our audience is probably coming from the Svelte world, so I do want to kind of focus on that today. Now, the other thing, and this is the next kind of super exciting thing I wanted to showcase today, is the changes to the props themselves. So obviously the props, the component looks a little different visually and things like that, but at the end of the day, it's accordion. It's doing kind of the same general idea. You click a button and it opens the panel within. For props, though, we are making some notable changes here. There's a few things I've kind of noted here at the top. Feel free to pause the video if you want to kind of read through these, or I'll link to this in the written version of this kind of progress update. But I'm going to kind of skip ahead and just again kind of focus on the props themselves. And so the biggest change you're going to notice is a change to the naming convention. We're still using the same thing that you know, the same pattern that you know and love from Skeleton V2, which is if you have like a width property or a spacing property or padding, you can provide a set of Tailwind classes into that, and that's provided to the appropriate place within the template of that component. So all of that knowledge, all of that stuff carries through. That convention is still there from Skeleton V2 to Skeleton V3. What's changing, however, is we're trying to solve a couple really tough problems that we ran into with V2, which was in some cases, and I'm going to jump over to a little diagram here to visualize this. In some cases, you might have a component like this, like the accordion item. It has maybe like a wrapping element, which is like a div or something like that. You have a button that's maybe like the little part that you click and toggle, and then you have the panel that opens and closes, right? So there's kind of three parts to the accordion item component. The problem comes is when you want to provide classes or styles to a particular portion inside of that template, right? So if I want to target the wrapping parent, or if I want to target this, you know, the control, or if I want to toggle, you know, control the styling for the toggled panel, like it was really tough to do that. You had to go through this like weird kind of arbitrary syntax that looked something like, let me show you here, something like this, where you had to have all this kind of weird alien Tailwind syntax to be able to reach down the DOM tree and style those children within the template. So what we're doing in V3 is we're just kind of throwing all of that out the window and rethinking the way we implement our props. And so the way we're doing this is we're providing two things. We're providing a category for our properties, and we're also providing kind of a prefix for some of the naming for the props themselves to provide more semantic descriptions for what they affect. And so if you see this, you can kind of immediately start to visualize and see, just based on the colors, what's targeting what. So we have the green properties up here, which are targeting the wrapping parent. We have the pink that are targeting the control, and we have the yellow here that's controlling the panel. Some weird naming maybe here that you're maybe looks a little alien, you're not necessarily familiar with. This base classes, you know, kind of repeated in a few different places here. And so what we're doing is we're trying to solve sort of a few problems per element. So if I come over here and I look, I've got a little visualization again to kind of show you what's actually happening behind the scenes here. Let me open this diagram here. So inside of the template, maybe we have a root element that's a div or something like that. It has a class, and it's got several properties, style properties that are providing different styles to that element. So we have base styles, which kind of sets the defaults for how the control or the panel is styled. We have a set of properties, style props that are passed in from you, the user, that maybe changes the padding or the background color or something like that. And then we need this kind of concept of sort of an overflow. So if there's classes that we don't have dedicated style props for, we have background and padding, but you need margin, and that's not included. We need an overflow for you to be able to provide your own custom options there. And again, all three of these are taking in Tailwind classes. And so these are the default Tailwind classes for setting the base styles. These are the Tailwind classes that are being provided via props to style background, padding, etc. And then these are your arbitrary Tailwind classes that are being passed in to extend and kind of go a little further with that. Okay. And so we're using these name conventions to actually target how this is scaffolded into the class set. And so the base classes, of course, let's just throw those in by default. Those kind of appear at the beginning of the list. Any of the user provided properties, so background color, you know, padding, margin, those others I've mentioned several times, those kind of get sandwiched in the middle. And then those arbitrary classes that users again provide, that they may optionally choose to use those or not. Those kind of just get tacked onto the end of the class list. Now the order of the classes don't necessarily, that's not necessarily how Tailwind precedent works, but just conceptually we want to make sure that you understand, like, how, if I'm passing classes in, where are they being applied to the template? How are they being applied to the template? Roughly where are they being provided in that class list or something like that? So this just kind of helps visualize that. If I jump back to this diagram, we now have a better understanding immediately of like what is base and classes. But what you're going to notice is that we've got these prefixed versions for these kind of child items. And the reason we introduced this is, again, we're trying to solve some problems that we identified in V2, which is what happens if you need to be able to set the background color for the parent, for this particular control, and then this particular panel, right? Those are three individual portions of the template that you may want to set the color, uniquely for each particular one. Now we really struggled with this in V2 because we didn't really have a convention set, so we didn't have a way to differentiate those. And so what we've done in V3 is we now do have a convention, which is anything applied to the parent, the root element here, we do not prefix. Anything that does affect a child or a grandchild within the component, we do prefix and give it just a semantic description. So you can immediately know you're setting the background color for the parent versus the control versus, the panel or whatever other child, elements or grandchildren live inside of that. And these aren't necessarily specific just to background as I'm listing here. This could be background, this could be padding, this could be margin, so on and so forth. It's just, again, a convention for how we structure and name our properties and how those are passed and provided into the template itself. Okay, so this is nice and, for conceptualizing. Let's see what that looks like in practice. So we're going to open the accordion item, and we're going to see some of these actual, names and class conventions and property conventions kind of used. We have our base styles, which by default, we're not doing any kind of styles to the base accordion item, which is, if I come down here as a div, and then I'll give you a second just to kind of read through those and kind of look through those and see and kind of understand what's going on there. Okay, and so you can kind of see we've got that. We've got the base styles for control. Apologize. Didn't mean to cough there. And then we have the base styles for the panel itself. In addition, we have a bunch of different kind of unique properties that we're defining here for unique styles for like hover, when you hover over. Let's look at this. Yeah, that little hover style that appears right there. We've got the padding, and we've got, just a bunch of different properties that target different portions of the template. And again, we're using that prefix to kind of quickly identify where is that going to target. So, yeah, the property names are a little bit more verbose than they are in V2, but what you get in return is much better understanding of where those styles are going to be applied. And, I will note, like right now, if you come and look at the V2 docs, we have this nice kind of list of properties. So if I come to the accordion, you can see this nice kind of flat list of properties for each of the components. We do not yet have an equivalent for this in V3 yet in the documentation. We are looking to implement this as soon as possible. There's some technical requirements for how we prune that data and, package it up and then provide it into the documentation itself. So I will say, if you're kind of curious about to see some of these, definitely come check out the source code for the reactors fault component. And then very specifically, if you click one of these components, you'll see the type definition. And this is the type for the props themselves. So you can kind of see those broken into sort of categories. So here's all of our root properties. Or if I come in and look at, come in and look at the item, the accordion item, we have root, we have control, we have even icon, we have panel, we have a whole bunch of these that are prefixed, and all the styles that are, all these will be strings because they provide a set of styles, and we have a little description to kind of showcase that. And then if you want, you can jump into the component itself and see what those default values are. They're kind of defined right here where the props are brought in. Okay, so just if you're curious, you want to see that from your own perspective, there is a way for you to kind of get access to that information. Obviously, these are just style props, so anything like this, these are style props, which means they take in a set of styles or Tailwind utility classes. We do have functional properties that are used for things like setting an ID, the open and close state, disabled state. Those will work exactly as before. They'll just be listed at the top and kind of denoted as such. Events are now considered, the way this has changed in Svelte 5, you now pass in what is essentially like a callback function that acts as your event handler. Simple enough, that's our kind of default for that. And then in Svelte 5, snippets or replacement for your slots are treated as properties as well. So those are brought in and kind of imported. And you'll even get like different color syntax highlighting here that kind of indicates that, hey, these are kind of standard properties, which these have a little bit more going on. Okay. So again, I just wanted to kind of go over really quick and show you all those conventions. If we jump over to the React version of the component, you can see we're using that exact same kind of convention here where we have individual properties sandwiched between the base and the classes. And if you're curious about the choice of the term or the name classes, we're trying to avoid collision with the standard class attribute because some frameworks will struggle with class versus, hey, this is going to be my arbitrary set of override classes. So we're just using the convention to add ES or make it plural there, classes instead of class. That is a little change from V2, but again, just a little heads up there. Other than that, though, you can do some really cool stuff with this. And so I wanted to kind of quickly just bring up the component here. This is going to be the Svelte version of the component, the one you're seeing on the screen right here. And I wanted to show you some stuff we could do. So we can do things like set the width. Oops, and it helps if I don't delete part of the word. There we go. You can see there's some IntelliSense suggesting what we can do. We could set the width to, 50%. I'm going to save that. You can see the component immediately updates there. We can see that on the screen. I can also come in here and say, I'm on a Mac, and you hit Command I, you get a list of suggestions for what props are available. So if I wanted to kind of just quickly read through these, you can even see a little description that kind of describes, okay, what does this do? So this is setting the vertical spacing. So if I wanted to do something like this, but why? I don't know, I'll do something just really crazy, 20. Yeah, everything's real spaced out and really spread apart right there. So you can kind of see like there's some really cool things you can do with just the standard syntax you're used to. But if you want to target a little further down the tree, so if you wanted to do something like the panel, styling, you can come onto an item and say panel classes, which is just kind of the overflow, and say, I don't know, background green 500. And we're just do that just on the first one. And we're going to come and see, okay, there we go. We targeted just the panel for only the first item. If I open any of these others, they do not have that green color. Or if I wanted to do the control, I could do the same thing for the control. Control, save, there we go. Okay. Now just the top part is colored. Now the other ones are not. So just gives you a nice little kind of semantic description. You can see we do have all the type handling in place there. So if you hover the property, it does provide some additional context of how you're providing arbitrary CSS classes that are appended to the onto the class list for the control element. And yeah, just do some really cool stuff with that. Now the last one I'm going to cover here is really the first one on the list. So you may be wondering like why I skipped it. So the base classes. So you can, the problem and again, these are all kind of solving problems we've identified in V2. One of the other problems we've noticed was in the past, some people really want to override or do like a one-off set of styles that just nukes all of the default styles and lets you just completely start from scratch. And so in other component libraries, that might be considered like a headless approach, like a headless UI or headless component, something like that. We obviously don't want to go that direction because we want to provide all these nice kind of canned default styles for you that work with your theme right out of the box. But we do want to give you that level of control. And so what we've done is if you come in here and say, I don't know, control base, we can set some styles for that. And I'm just going to do red 500. And so if we provide, controls, base styles, we can do this. And what that's going to do is do exactly what I just described. Nuke all of the default styles and just substitute them with my own. So if we look at the component here, the default base control styles includes flex and text start and text center and all these different styles here. And if we replace that, it's just a prop. If we just replace the prop with our own custom utility classes, it essentially just goes in here, deletes all of those, and just replace it with whatever you provide instead. So it's almost like a faux headless approach to styling your components. And you can do some really cool stuff with this. You can say width full, you can say padding, 20, and then we'll come and look. And now we have this crazy huge control, even just as a one-off, just for this one particular set. We can still kind of try to match some of the styles we had. So we could say flex, I don't know, get 4, something like that. And then, yeah, you start to see some of that stuff kind of go back into the default style or default state. But again, it's optional to use the base, but we do provide that. And it is one of those features that I think is really going to set Skeleton V3 apart from its prior iteration, in that you now have that control. And you can now do that, as I mentioned previously, you can do that here. You can set the base styles here. You can set the base styles for the control, or you can set the base styles for the panel. Basically, any element should have that same kind of convention kind of carried through the entire thing. And we can look at the list of props and say, yep, we can change the root, we can change the base, we can change the icon base even, and we can change, down here in the panel. And then classes, again, just sets arbitrary additional classes that are appended to the end of the class list. So really a lot of flexibility as far as like what you can change. In most cases, I think most folks are just going to change the kind of presets that are available here, change the padding, change the rounded, things like that. But if you really want to go that extra mile, the base and the classes do provide a lot of functionality for you to kind of go that extra mile, right? So do some really cool stuff. All right, so with that said, the only other thing I wanted to mention real quick is that we are in progress for porting all of our components from V4 over to, from Skeleton V3, or too many numbers, Skeleton V2 to Skeleton V3. And so if you're curious to see the progress on that, we do have that listed on GitHub. You can come onto the GitHub repo, click issues here, click milestones, this little button up here at the top right, and then choose V3. And we have a list of all the issues that we're tracking, especially features down here. So if you want to know if the autocomplete feature has now been ported over to React or Svelte, we have a status indicator for all of that. So we're not quite opening the gate yet for other, anybody, that's watching, that's a contributor, to jump in and start, taking on these different features to port over. The reason being is that we're testing this internally, just making sure that we have all of our guidelines set up to make sure that people understand of, hey, if I'm going to implement a new feature or if I want to port over a feature, what are my guidelines? What are my steps to do that? So if you are curious, you can go on again to the next.skeleton.dev site, come in here and click the contribute section. And we have sections that detail how do I set up documentation pages for a new feature, and how do I actually port over a component? What are the conventions that I use for that? Where is the package located? How do I kind of get started? How do I start my dev server? How props work? All those things that I just kind of covered in a written form, in a more detailed form. Even cover some use cases that I didn't go over, like dynamic style props. So if you need to switch between states, stuff like that. How we do our, on and on. Just lots of information here. If you are curious to contribute, please do let us know. Again, we're not opening the floodgates for third-party contributions yet, but I am very curious to see if there is anybody interested in jumping in and helping. So if you've either read our written update on this related to this video, or if you're watching this video, please do reach out either on GitHub or Discord preferably, usually, and just let us know. Let us know you're interested in helping port over the features. Because again, it's a major effort to go through that process of, we're not just bringing the features one-to-one from V2 to V3. We're bringing them over. We're porting to, kind of bifurcating to Svelte 5 and React. And then we're also updating all the conventions for the props along the way, and all the syntax, and rewriting the components. And also, we're doing things like improving the features as we go. So if you come in here and look at app bar, I think is a good one. We have kind of a list of notes of things that we're going to kind of improve as we go. So maybe adding new features. Some features have like community requested stuff. And likewise, if you're just curious to say, hey, I'd really like to see support for this or that feature on, app bars or something else. These posts exist on GitHub for that purpose. Come in here, just leave a comment on the feature and let us know, what you'd like to see added as we go. And we can't promise we're going to get everything in there, but we're doing our best to kind of move things forwards. And that's where we are. The next video you'll see will probably be covering some of the initial initial versions of the theme generator. So definitely be, keep an eye out for that. And otherwise, thanks for watching and thanks for your time. Appreciate it.